Alright, so here you can get an idea of what I was talking about earlier in terms of how to get one of these European style heater boxes installed. So I started this episode with a little clip of showing how this other driver's side heater box was installed. Unfortunately, it got cut off due to the incompetence of the GoPro operator, that being me. But I hopefully you could see what the story was there. Essentially, the front of the engine heater box was supported by a jack stand while the back was attached first, so it had something to hang to. It's a good way to do it if you don't have any friends, or if the friends you do have better things to do than work on a Porsche engine, which admittedly is pretty difficult to understand because it is such a good time. So let's take a look at the final install on this side. As you can see, this is just an example of the doubled up nuts to drive in the stud into the head. And of course, the outside one would get removed, I guess. You could leave it there. One thing I did want to mention, actually two things I want to mention about these nuts. The general consensus is to use 8mm. These are all 8mm nuts that are 12mm across the flats. In other words, that's the size wrench you would use. The reason being that, try getting a larger wrench in there. Well, I did, because I used 13mm. They're much more readily available. I totally agree with the opinion to use 12mm across the flat instead of 13. Easier to do, but clearly 13 is doable because there it is. The other thing I'd say about using these nuts rather than copper. So the consensus also is to use copper nuts or copper plated nuts. The reason being, it will keep the nut from seizing onto the stud, and when you go to remove this exhaust some fine day, you'll be able to remove the nut without removing the stud. Well, I actually want to remove the stud. And if you watched the prior episode, you'll see why. So if I ever do have to remove this exhaust, I'm going to remove these studs. So if the nut decides to seize to the stud and it pulls the stud out with the nut, great. I just saved myself a step. So that's the theory, possibly controversial, but hey, it's a theory. I wanted to show you this. I was looking for this yesterday, if you'll recall, and it was sitting right there as I walked past it, in a state of obvious obliviousness. So here it is. So this is the snorkel that attaches to the European heater fan shroud. It attaches to that opening I showed yesterday, basically right there. So why does this thing look the way this thing looks? I'm glad you asked. So if you come back, so the fan shroud, imagine it's there, picture it in your mind. This comes off the fan shroud. This end, short hose, goes to that heat exchanger. This one, via the hose that you saw laying on the ground yesterday, comes out of this side, goes to that heat exchanger. So if you can imagine that, quote, fresh air from the fan shroud travels through the snorkel directly into each heat exchanger, totally bypassing the stinky, possibly carbon monoxide filled parts of the engine So that cooling air just goes right on through. This heating air goes right through here. Works great. All right. So next step, which I will be doing shortly and showing a video of shortly, taking the fan shroud, attaching it to the engine, and then we start attaching the shrouding in bits and pieces. So more to come on that. Stay tuned. So before I replace the fan shroud, I do want to replace the oil filter element. So to do so, remove the bolt that's in the top. For that, I used a 23mm wrench, which fit just fine. Remove this lid. Note the gasket inside, which you will need to replace with the new gasket, as you can see right there. Also note the handy pull tab to remove the old filter. Also note that the pull tab is broken, making it not very handy. So we will be using an alternate method to remove the canister, which I have not identified yet. So, be right back. Alright, so the broken tab was not the calamity that I thought it would be. I could actually grab what was left of it and twist the filter enough to break the seals loose, and it pulled pretty much right out. I wish you could see the color of the oil that's in this container tray here. It is a decidedly dark shade of dark. So I did everything I could to remove all of that out of the filter housing in an effort to keep it from circulating into my nice new engine components. So I hope I was effective in doing that. You can see the new filter is installed. Pretty simple. You slide it over that pipe, no big deal. You can see the new gasket is installed on the lid. So now it's a pretty simple matter of reinstalling the lid, reinstalling the bolt, tightening it down, and at that point, this is going to go onto that engine sitting across the room from me. So that's next. Alrighty, so fan shroud is on. A couple of things to point out. When you drop this shroud on with the generator attached into its little cradle, make sure the hold down strap is shoved to the back of the generator, because once this is onto the stand, it's an easy enough thing to pull it forward and onto its little place on the stand to which it clamps onto. If you don't do that, then you'll have to lift back up and slide it back over the generator, basically having to reinstall the shroud, which I would prefer not to do if I were you. Something else to look at. So this bottom braided hose, I had to replace it. The braiding was beginning to fray pretty badly. It is in a constant state of bendiness, as you can see. So what's annoying about this is that the picture shown on the online websites show it to look more like the original, which this is. You can see the correct yellow CAD plating. You can see the little orange stripy things in the braiding. They did manage to replicate the stripy things, but as you can see, it is definitely not yellow cad plated. So if originality is your objective, which is fine, I mean, I'm trying to keep it somewhat that way, but obviously having replaced the pistons and cylinders with a different size and an aftermarket head, I'm not that worried about it. But if it is your objective, don't go by the picture on the webpage. Tell them to send you a picture of the actual thing. The first one I got actually had just a plain old stainless hose without the orange stripy things, and it was missing actually the it was missing the flared end of this and the attaching nut. So I would have had to flare it myself like a brake line and get the right size nuts. So I chose to get a different one. These are 12 millimeter across the flat. Nuts on the end of those for the attachment. Do not over torque them. It's not necessary, and it'll kind of ruin your day if they split or strip. So don't ruin an otherwise good day of working on an old Porsche. One thing I noticed when the fan shroud was out, and I should have showed you before, but the number, you can see a 616/16 back there showing it to be an SC engine. You can see a little 613 down there next to the distributor. That matches the two case halves, which, oh, there they are, right there. So we know this three-piece case is matching from the factory. Really, before you put this assembly on the engine, just make sure everything spins without making a terrible noise. So, meaning the fan spins nice and free and it's not scraping anywhere on the shroud, which this one is not doing. So, all good. All right, from here, we start putting on the rest of the shrouding. That's next. So I had to take a break. Calamity struck and I knocked my beer over. So I had to take some time to clean that up and mourn its loss. It was obviously pretty traumatic. I do want to point out one thing. So I've laid this out somewhat in the order, well, not somewhat, in the order where they all attach, not in the order chronologically, but spatially. First step in this little jigsaw puzzle is installing, or at least setting into place at this point, the cylinder shrouds. There's 4 pieces, and there's really only one way they can go on in terms of lining up the attachment hole to the fan shroud. This one, somebody did a fine job of something, repairing, quote, repairing. This one's missing its little rubber thing for, as you can see on that side, for the guides for the spark plug wires. I need to order that. That's after Murphy's Law, that's the first rule of auto restoration. As soon as you think you've ordered all the parts, you're wrong. So got to get that. One thing I ordered earlier, whoever put this together last time used these Allen screws on everything. So I ordered a whole new set of hardware for the shrouding, and really the rule of thumb here is if it's horizontal, in other words, if the attachment goes in horizontally, it's one of these cheesehead flat blade screwdriver screws, and if it goes horizontal or vertically, basically into the fan shroud, it's this bolt. So I decided to make it right, even though nobody will probably ever notice, but it makes me feel better, and that's what's important. So everything's basically laid out at this point. I just need to start tightening down the fan shrouds, the little fuel pump shroud, and I do need to take a break after that because I have to put these little rubber holes here for these heads to be installed in a 912 for a breather system, which I don't have. So there's little rubber plugs that John Wilhoit makes, and he said they were supplied with the heads. I'm not going to disagree with him. They may have been in the box. I threw it away, and he sent me some new ones, free shipping and everything. So very cool. Really good customer service from those guys. If you ever order any parts from Wilhoit, you'll be very happy with not only the quality of the part, but the quality of their service as well. So I have to get those installed because obviously I cannot install this piece until then. So I'll be putting the hardware into these shrouds, and I will be calling it a day. Until next time.